Let me tell you something before we start. This story is going to make you uncomfortable, not because of the violence, not because of the blood. There is no action movie stuff here. It is going to make you uncomfortable because by the time we are done, you are going to recognize almost every single person in this story. Not by name, by behavior. You have met these people, I promise you that. Now let us begin. It is a warm evening in New York City. The year is somewhere in the mid-1990s. There is a party happening in a townhouse on East 71st Street in Manhattan. Not a normal townhouse. The largest private residence in the entire city of New York. 7 floors. A room with nothing in it but a giant painting of a prison. A front door that opens into a world most human beings will never see up close. The guests are arriving. There is a former president of the United States. There are sitting senators. There are billionaires who own entire industries. There are celebrities whose faces you would recognize anywhere. There are scientists, academics, royalty from overseas, editors of major newspapers. The kind of room where if you listed every name on a piece of paper, most people would not believe the list was real. And standing in the middle of all of it, calm as a man waiting for a bus, is Jeffrey Epstein. He is not the loudest person in the room. He is not the funniest. He is not performing for anyone. He is just there, smiling quietly, listening carefully, making every single person he speaks to feel like they are the most interesting person at the party. Now stop right there. Freeze that image for a second. Look at that man standing in that room. Ask yourself the question that nobody at that party was asking out loud. Who is this person, actually? Where did all of this come from? What exactly does he do? How does a man with no college degree and a vague, nearly impossible to verify financial business end up being the person every powerful man in America wants to have dinner with? Nobody was asking, and that silence, that comfortable, convenient, well-dressed silence, that is where this whole story lives. To understand how we got to that room, we need to go back, all the way back to Brooklyn. All right, here is where I need you to stay with me. Because this part is the part most people skip. They want to get straight to the scandal and the island and the famous names. I understand that. But if you skip this part, you miss the whole lesson. And the lesson is the only reason a story like this is worth telling. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born on January 20, 1953, in Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York. His family was ordinary, working class. His father tended parks for the city. His mother worked at a school. They were not struggling in desperation, but they were nowhere near wealth. Jeffrey grew up knowing what the outside of certain doors looked like without ever expecting to walk through them. But he was smart. Not just regular smart, the kind of smart that teachers notice and cannot quite explain. He had a gift for mathematics that felt almost like something separate from the rest of him, like a tool he had been handed that other people had not. He was doing advanced mathematics as a teenager. He skipped grades. He enrolled at Cooper Union at 16 years old. He did not finish his degree. He dropped out. Now here is the thing I want you to notice right there, because this detail matters more than almost any other detail in this whole story. Jeffrey Epstein figured out very early in life that credentials were not actually what opened doors. What opened doors was making the person on the other side of the door feel something. Feel impressed, feel smart, feel seen, feel like they had just encountered someone exceptional. He did not need a piece of paper to do that, so he stopped chasing the piece of paper. In the early 1970s, this young man from Brooklyn with no degree talked his way into a teaching position at the Dalton School. Now I need you to understand what the Dalton School is. It is not a regular school. It is one of the most exclusive private schools in Manhattan. The children of the wealthy, the powerful, the well-connected. That is who went to Dalton. And Jeffrey Epstein is standing in front of those children, teaching mathematics and physics. No degree, no formal qualification, Just the confidence of a man who had decided the rules about who gets to stand where were written by people who were not paying close enough attention to him. Here is the question I want you to sit with. How does a person like that make you feel when you meet them? Not how should they make you feel. How do they actually make you feel? Because most of us, if we are honest, find that kind of confidence attractive. We confuse certainty with competence. We confuse boldness with legitimacy. We see someone who acts like they belong in a room and our brain does this little automatic thing where it says, well, they must belong there or they would not be acting like that. That instinct is not stupidity. It is deeply human. It is millions of years of social wiring telling you that confidence is usually a reliable signal. Jeffrey Epstein understood that instinct better than almost anyone alive. At Dalton, he met a man named Alan Greenberg. Greenberg was the chairman of Bear Stearns, one of the most powerful investment banks on Wall Street. Epstein impressed him. Greenberg brought him in. And by 1980, with no degree and no conventional path behind him, Jeffrey Epstein was a full partner at Bear Stearns. He was 27 years old. Let that sit for a second. Then in 1981, he left Bear Stearns under circumstances that were never publicly explained. He started his own firm. He told people he managed money exclusively for billionaires. He said his minimum threshold was $1 billion. He said he was extremely selective. He cultivated an image so exclusive, so deliberately out of reach, that the people he allowed into his orbit felt honored to be there. And when you feel honored to be in someone's presence, you do not interrogate them. You do not ask for proof. You say thank you and you hope they let you come back. That is the engine, right there. That is the whole machine. Remember it, because we are going to see it operate at a scale that is going to take your breath away. Now we get to the part of the story that I want you to pay very close attention to. Not because it is the most dramatic part, but because it is the most instructive part. And I am going to ask you to do something uncomfortable while I tell it. I am going to ask you to watch not just what Epstein did, but how the world around him responded. Because that response is the real story. By the late 1980s and well into the 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein had assembled what looked, from the outside, like an empire. The townhouse in Manhattan, a 10,000-acre ranch in New Mexico, a home in Palm Beach, Florida, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands that he named Little St. James, a Boeing 727 private jet, properties in Paris and elsewhere. Most people will never see one property like any of these in their entire lifetime. Epstein had all of them at once. And everywhere he went, the names followed him. Bill Clinton flew on his jet. Prince Andrew visited the island. Alan Dershowitz, one of the most famous lawyers in America, was in his social circle. Prominent scientists, academics, Wall Street figures. The flight logs alone read like a who's who of American and international power. Now again, stop right there. I want you to imagine being one of those people. You are powerful, you are successful. You have spent your whole life in rooms with other powerful and successful people. And someone introduces you to Jeffrey Epstein. He is charming. He is interested in your ideas. He invites you somewhere extraordinary. And when you look around at who else is there, it is everyone you have ever wanted to be in a room with. Do you ask the hard questions? Do you dig into where exactly his money came from? Do you ask yourself why this man, whose financial business nobody can quite describe in specific terms, seems to have unlimited resources and an inexhaustible supply of access? Most people did not, because asking those questions felt ungracious. It felt like doubting a gift. But while all of those parties were happening, something else was happening too. This is the part I have to ask you to hear carefully. Young girls were being brought to Jeffrey Epstein's homes. Many of them were teenagers. Some were as young as 14. Most came from circumstances where money was tight and stability was uncertain. They were recruited by people in their own communities. sometimes by other young women who had already been through the same thing, who told them there was easy money available for giving a man a massage. They were paid small amounts, amounts that meant something to them and meant nothing to Epstein. And then the abuse happened. I am not going to dwell on the details. The facts are documented in court records, and they do not need to be stretched or dramatized. What happened to these girls was a serious, sustained, criminal violation of their bodies and their lives and their futures. What I want you to understand is the system around it. The recruitment network meant Epstein never had to go looking. The girls came to him through layers of intermediaries who each had plausible deniability about what they were facilitating. The payments created a transaction that could later be described in softer language. The locations, private homes, a private island, meant there were no witnesses except the ones he controlled. And then there was Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a British media mogul who died under mysterious circumstances in 1991. She was well-connected, well-educated, comfortable in elite social settings, and she became central to Epstein's world. Prosecutors would later argue that she was not just a companion to Epstein. She was an active participant in the recruitment and grooming of victims. She provided cover. She provided access. She provided the social credibility that made the whole operation look, from a distance, like just another rich person's life. Here is the thing that I keep coming back to when I think about how this worked. The girls who were harmed did not move in the same world as the senators and celebrities and billionaires who moved through Epstein's orbit. They were invisible to those people, not deliberately invisible, just invisible the way that certain people always are to certain other people. The staff, the service workers, the ones who are present but not seen. And when those girls later tried to come forward and say what had happened, they ran into a wall that was built not just from Epstein's money, but from that invisibility. Who are you and who is he? That is the wall. You have seen a version of that wall in your own life. Maybe not this extreme, but you know the feeling of being the person in the room whose account of events carries less weight than someone else's, simply because of where you stand in the order of things, simply because of what your name means compared to theirs. That feeling, that imbalance, that is what Epstein's entire operation ran on. Here is what I need you to understand about cracks. Cracks do not announce themselves. They start in a place you cannot see, deep in the wall, and they work outward slowly. And by the time you can see them from the outside, they have already been growing for a long time. The cracks in Jeffrey Epstein's world started with the girls who would not stay silent. In the early 2000s, complaints began reaching the Palm Beach Police Department. Young women were coming forward and saying what had happened at Epstein's Palm Beach home. The detective assigned to the case, a man named Joe Ricari, took the investigation seriously. He was methodical. He built the evidence carefully. By the time his investigation was complete, he had identified more than 30 potential victims and had a case he believed in. That case went to the state attorney's office in Palm Beach County, and then it went to the federal government. The FBI got involved. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida began building a federal case. And then something happened that is, in the entire history of this story, the single most important thing to understand. In 2007 and 2008, the federal government negotiated a deal with Jeffrey Epstein's legal team. The deal is called a non-prosecution agreement. What it meant in practice was this. Epstein would plead guilty to 2 state charges, one of them solicitation of prostitution involving a minor. He would receive 18 months in a county jail. He would be allowed to leave that jail for 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, for work release. He would register as a sex offender. And crucially, in a way that would define everything that came after. The deal was kept secret from the victims. The women who had come forward, who had given statements, who had endured the process of telling strangers the worst things that had ever happened to them in detail, with the understanding that the system was working on their behalf. They were not told. They were not consulted. They found out after it was done. Epstein served 13 months. He left the jail for most of every working day. He went back to his offices. He continued his life. The U.S. attorney who signed off on that deal was a man named Alexander Acosta. Years later, in 2019, when he was serving as the U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Trump, the details of the deal became fully public. He resigned. But in the years between 2008 and 2019, Jeffrey Epstein went right back to doing what he had always done. The parties continued. The plane flew. The island received visitors. And he apparently believed, with the comfort of a man whose experience had consistently reinforced the belief, that he was simply beyond the reach of consequences. You see this pattern everywhere, not just in criminals, in anyone who has tested the limits of what they can get away with and found that the limits were further out than they expected. Each time they push and nothing happens, the boundary moves. Each time the thing that should have stopped them does not, they recalibrate their sense of what they are allowed to do. It is not intelligence that produces that arrogance. It is repetition. It is the slow accumulation of getting away with things until getting away with things starts to feel like a permanent condition rather than a temporary one. The journalist who would eventually crack this story open was not a federal agent or a prosecutor or a political insider. She was a reporter named Julie Brown at the Miami Herald. Brown spent years on this story. She found victims who had never spoken publicly. She documented the deal in detail. She traced the network. She connected the dots between what had happened to these girls and the institutional response that had made it possible for it to continue. In November 2018, the Herald published her investigation. The article spread everywhere. It forced the story back into public view with a clarity that no amount of money or legal maneuvering could soften. And this time, the world that had changed around Jeffrey Epstein while he had been going about his business was ready to respond differently. The crack had reached the surface, and the wall was coming down. By early 2019, federal prosecutors in New York, separate from the Florida office that had made the original deal, were looking at Epstein again. The Southern District of New York. This is not a regional arrangement. This is one of the most powerful prosecutorial offices in the country. They are not easily influenced by wealth or connections or the kind of quiet pressure that had worked on other offices at other times. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein stepped off his private jet at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, returning from Paris. Federal agents were waiting. They arrested him on charges of sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors. The potential sentence was 45 years in federal prison. He was taken to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. His lawyers went to court and argued for bail. They offered extraordinary conditions: monitoring, house arrest in his Manhattan mansion, financial guarantees. The argument was that a man of his means and his age and his health was not a flight risk. The judge looked at the private jet and the private island and the properties in multiple countries, including one in a location with no extradition treaty with the United States, and she said no. For the first time in his life, Jeffrey Epstein was in a place he could not buy his way out of. And then on the morning of August 10, 2019, correctional officers found him unresponsive in his cell. He was 66 years old. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as suicide by hanging. Now I am going to say something here that I want to be careful about. The official ruling says suicide. The official ruling is what it is. I am not going to sit here and tell you what happened in that cell because I do not know, and neither does anyone else who is speaking honestly. What I will tell you is this. The questions that surrounded that death were not invented by conspiracy theorists. They emerged from documented facts. Epstein had been placed on suicide watch less than 3 weeks earlier after a previous incident in the same facility. He had been taken off suicide watch. The guards assigned to his unit had allegedly fallen asleep and falsified the logs to cover it. The cameras in the corridor outside his cell had malfunctioned. The standard protocols for monitoring a high-profile inmate in his precise situation had not been followed. Those are not theories. Those are the findings of official investigations. 2 guards were eventually charged with falsifying records. Neither was convicted. The facility itself, the Metropolitan Correctional Center, was closed in 2021 due to what the Justice Department described as unsafe and deteriorating conditions. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in July 2020 at a property in New Hampshire. She was convicted in December 2021 on 5 federal charges including sex trafficking of a minor. She received a 20-year sentence. She maintains her innocence and continues to fight her conviction from prison. The names in Epstein's flight logs and black book and various documents, the ones attached to senators and royals and billionaires and celebrities, most of those names have faced no legal consequence whatsoever. Some have been questioned. Most have said they did not know. A small number have acknowledged more than that. The case that should have been the thing that answered the biggest questions, the full federal trial of Jeffrey Epstein, never happened. The man who could have been forced to answer those questions under oath, on the record, in public, died before it could happen. Whether you believe that was by his own hand or someone else's, the result is the same. The door that would have opened something we all deserve to see closed before we could walk through it. All right, we are at the end now, and this is the part I need you to really hear. Because there is a version of this story that is very easy to watch and walk away from feeling clean. The story of a monster, an island, a private jet, famous names, secret deals, a suspicious death, a story about people so far removed from ordinary life that it has nothing to do with you or anyone you know. That version lets you off the hook. I do not think you should let yourself off the hook. Here is the version that requires more from you. Jeffrey Epstein did not succeed because he was uniquely evil. He succeeded because he was an expert at using ordinary human impulses as tools. The desire to be near power, the reluctance to ask awkward questions, the social instinct that tells you that challenging someone influential will cost you something. The very normal human tendency to see what you want to see and find reasons to dismiss what makes you uncomfortable. Not one of those impulses belongs exclusively to billionaires and politicians. Every single one of them shows up in every workplace, every family, every community, every day. The coworker whose numbers never quite add up, but nobody wants to be the one to raise it. The family member whose behavior at gatherings gets explained away every single time because challenging it would make the holidays difficult. The boss who everyone knows is taking things they should not be taking, but who has enough status to make the alternative to silence feel too costly. The mechanism is the same. The scale is the only difference. And here is the other thing I want you to sit with. The people who eventually brought this story into the light were not the powerful ones. They were not the senators or the prosecutors or the attorneys with the impressive offices. They were the girls. Young women, many of them without resources, without famous names, without the kind of credibility that the world automatically extends to people with money. They kept coming forward for years, long after any reasonable person might have concluded that the system was never going to be on their side. They kept going anyway. That persistence, in the face of a system that was actively arranged against them, is the thing in this story worth remembering long after the famous names have faded. Every person in this story made choices. The ones who looked away made a choice. The prosecutors who signed that 2008 deal made a choice. The people on that plane and on that island who told themselves, It was not their business made a choice. And the young women who refused to accept that what had been done to them was simply the price of crossing paths with a powerful man, they made choices too. The difference is what those choices cost them, and what those choices were in service of. I want to leave you with something real. Not dramatic, not a speech. Somewhere in your life right now, there is probably a situation where you know something is not right and saying so would cost you something. It might be small. It probably feels small compared to all of this. But the calculation you are running, the one that goes, is it worth it? Am I going to be believed? What happens to me if I speak? That is the same calculation those girls were running for years. They ran it and decided it was worth it anyway. The question is not whether something like what Epstein built can happen again. It is happening in smaller versions every single day everywhere around us. The question is who decides that asking the obvious question out loud is worth whatever it costs. Usually, it is the person with the least to lose. Sometimes it is the person with everything to lose. And sometimes, it turns out, the person willing to pay that price is someone the world never expected to be the one who finally made the whole thing come down. Pay attention to who that person is in your own life.